Well, my initial impressions of this vehicle are it's certainly a solid car and it's quite substantial in size. It feels quite sturdy and well put together, and the plastic on the inside doesn't seem to be as cheap and gnarly as it is in so many cars these days, including that of Mercedes. Maybe a bit primitive, but I usually give the dashboard a bit of a slap, and that's pretty nice. That it feels like it's molded rubber, pretty solid. Yeah, this car's quite nice. The steering's good. Front wheel drive car, which doesn't really make sense to me, especially being one of this size. Rear view vision. Well, it's interesting to note that the headrests are not obstructing the vision at all. Although, no, they're not bad at all. If you had 3 people in the back, you wouldn't be able to see much though, because the window really is very, very small. The side mirrors could be a bit longer and wider. I think they're a bit stingy in size. At the end of the day, I think it's important to have large mirrors to be able to see where you've been, see what's going on around you. After all, every car has that black spot, or blind spot should I say. Now, the instrument cluster on this vehicle, quite unusual in its layout, but it's certainly not obstructed by the steering wheel. It's very clear and precise. I can immediately glance down there and see what's going on. If there's any criticism about that, I would say it's actually very, very low. I don't quite understand why, but anyway. Center console. Now, the problem with this is it's very hard to differentiate the buttons from each other, because everything's silver, everything's flushed, and in the daytime you can't really read what the symbols are saying on here very, very quickly. I mean, I can't actually read that now. The only way I can read it is if I turn the lights on. So that's a bit of a flunk as far as I'm concerned, and I don't like that. In fact, when the lights are on at night time, this is very confusing. So I think there's a serious design flaw there. This is the manual gearbox. Feels quite sturdy. Gear transition's rather good actually. But I don't like this gator. This gator feels like it's made out of some right cheap shit. But all in all, the interior of the car is actually very nice. It's really a lot better than a lot of the other Fords that I drive these days. So I am pleasantly surprised. Now, as I say, the steering's very responsive. There's absolutely no lag on that steering at all, and that's interesting because so many cars have that. It's a big gap when you move the wheel before the wheels actually follow. And what's interesting is I do feel I'm connecting with the road and not just the anaesthetised barrier of the power steering. Now, this is the diesel model, and I must admit I'm not getting a lot of noise from the engine bay, which is always refreshing. But I'm just checking these brakes out now. They're making a dreadful noise. This car's done 19,500 miles, and the brakes should not be making that noise. Anyway, let's do an 0 to 60 test, see what this thing's like. That's 60. That was certainly quite nippy for a diesel. Doesn't hang around. I do feel quite confident driving this car. It's a lot of cars I get in, especially Fords, feel very flimsy and they feel very glib and superficial. This one actually feels solid, and it feels determined and certain. It's not a sporty engine, but I do feel like this car could be driven quite enthusiastically. The only concern with front wheel drive is accelerating on corners. It does tend to understeer, and as I accelerate, it does pull on the steering. Nowhere near as bad as something like a Lexus 400, but it is there all the same. Anybody thinking about buying one of these cars, what I would suggest you do, if you can, is probably go for something that's got the bigger engine. Now, one thing I do with a lot of cars is I give them a bit of a wiggle test to get some kind of idea of the characteristics of how a car's going to behave if I had to do an emergency swerve. And I have to say, for a big saloon like this car is very sturdy and it's very stable. I mean, it really does not sway, meander or roll around at all. It's very impressive. If you can get the sports version of this car, I think you'd be very impressed. And also, if they did do a four-wheel drive, then you'd have an absolutely amazing car. There's not many Fords available now which are worthy of a good repute. This one is. There's no doubt about it. It's a good car. Okay, it's front-wheel drive. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but it has to be said, credit's due where credit's due. It is a good car. That, along with the Ford S-Max, I would have to say they're the better ones of the Fords at the moment. Now, if there's any negative criticism I can say about this car, what I've discovered is the braking is a little bit grabby. Now, with the more expensive high-powered saloons like the Mercedes, the BMW, when you brake, you have the ability to apply a gradual pressure. Now, if I test the brakes now, it's not like that. It's very solid, and it's either on or off. It's almost grippy. It's almost gripping and grabbing. The brakes just feel like you're pressing onto concrete, and that's not good. I mean, you want to be able to apply the brakes at a gradual pressure depending on the circumstances. It shouldn't be a switch that is either on or off. And I also noticed there's a lot of vibration coming through the pedals of the car at the bottom, the brake pedal, accelerator, and that's when I get reminded that it just doesn't have the engineering and build quality of other saloons. But to be fair, anybody who's thinking about buying a Mondeo, I think will probably have already made their mind up about the car and will be a Mondeo fan. But now as I accelerate down, it's pulling, and it can be a bit alarming now, because as you accelerate it can shoot you over to the side a little bit. But to be fair, this is not a bad car. Anybody thinking about buying one, I think they know what to expect, really. And I have to end this by saying this one did exceed my expectations, and it is better than I thought. It seems to be put together a bit better. It feels like it's designed to last longer and fulfill its purpose to the end. The only faults I can find with the car really are such minor things that I don't even really think there's any point mentioning them. If I had to give it a score out of 10, I'd have to say around about a 7. Take one for a test drive. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.